Janeway did nothing wrong.
Other than murder?
Nerds.
Hello, everyone out there in the Alpha, Beta, Delta, Gamma quadrants, and beyond. It's Captain Merrick, joined today by my fellow night shift colleagues, Commander Jennifer and Science Officer Azure. Welcome, guys.
Hello.
Oh.
So today, we're going to be breaking one of the cardinal rules of civilized conversation. As you know, if you want to stay friends, you don't discuss politics, religion, Star Trek existential transporter theory, and especially Tuvix. But with the recent episode of Lower Decks bringing it back to our collective consciousness, little Borg joke there, we're going to be warping straight into this, so forget about your Anbo Jitsu grudge matches, rock-filled Sunkats wrestling bouts, and racquetball rivalries. I'm proud of that one. It's time for the definitive Tuvix debate. But first, just a little history. Back in May of 1996, or more appropriately, Stardate 49655.2, utterly disparate characters Tuvok and Neelix, beaming back from a planet, experience a transporter malfunction and are fused into a single being. Having the memories of both and the personalities of the two combined, Tuvix proves to be more than the sum of his parts, fitting in well on Voyager. Eventually, a cure is found, but Tuvix does not wish to die, refusing the treatment. Captain Janeway, attempting to speak for those whose voices cannot be heard, Tuvok and Neelix individually, orders and forces Tuvix to go through the procedure at phaser point amidst his cries and pleas for mercy. And thus a 26-year debate was born. And today, in classic Q tradition, we're putting Janeway on trial. Welcome to The Needs of the Many Outweigh the Needs of the Two, Vix. A tale of morals and murder. So let's just go around the table quickly and, get sort of a feel for this. Science Officer Azure, moral or murder?
Oh, moral. Janeway did nothing wrong.
No, just never.
Thanks for
ever,
coming to
just
my
like-
TED Talk. I will see you next week.
And Commander Jennifer?
I would say she made the right choice under the circumstances. It was an unfortunate circumstance with only one correct option, and Janeway chose that correct option.
So I obviously think that she murdered Tuvix in cold blood. So that's the correct answer. Thank you all for coming to our podcast. We are the Night Shift. We'll see you next week. Obviously just kidding. So just to give some context for everyone, Lower Deck, this has been something that's been debated for literally 26 years. This is one of those continually brought up, dredged up, rehashed debates. I think people feel very strongly about this. And when I saw the next episode of Lower Decks come up with the titles that were leaked, showing Tuvix as the first episode, I was so excited that not only would this be brought back, but then I started to see it trending on Twitter ahead of time. And I thought, oh man, this is just absolutely bringing back this discussion that probably a lot of us diehard Trekkies have had so many times. So I would like to just start by giving my sort of framework about this. I want to make it very clear. I understand her decision. And were I just in that situation selfishly, would I want to make that decision? And the answer is yes. It's a tough call to make. It is, I make a very clear dichotomy between my own selfish feelings about what I want and their own selfish feelings about what they want, and then what I think a Starfleet captain should do. And that's where I draw that line. I feel as though it makes perfect sense. I feel so strongly for Kes in this episode because she is truly between these two. I mean, she really is put right in the middle of this. She, of course, at that time had a romantic relationship with Neelix. She had a mentor relationship with Tuvok, him teaching her how to better her psychic powers and things like that. He was really becoming a mentor and father figure to her. So seeing these two things sort of combined into one was really difficult. And I loved the portrayal of that dilemma, of that situation that she was put in. It was actually like the heart and soul of this whole thing. Like, I just find that the crux of the argument for me is that he is an individual. In fact, at one point in the discussion that they end up having, she sort of asks him, right? She establishes with him, how are you experiencing this? How are you experiencing it with me? Are you multiple people? Are there multiple personalities inside of your head? And are they interacting with each other as well as with me? And he says, I have the memories of both men, but seem to have a single consciousness. He is real. He's a real person that is separate from the individual too, which means murder. He was murdered.
I mean, Mariner agrees with you.
Oh, yeah, she does. She said something like, you know, Janeway straight up murdered Tuvix, right? So I also love that you brought that up, because one of the things that I saw sort of floating around Twitter, especially for people that agree that it was the wrong choice to kill Tuvix, was that it was almost as if Star Trek or Starfleet, or at least certain characters in universe, took a stance. Took a very strong stance. It was, you know, it's Lower Decks, so how serious of a stance that is definitely in question. But they made comments that were akin to like, holy shit, Janeway didn't mess around. Just straight up killed that guy.
Oh yeah, Shax was like, Janeway didn't screw around.
And that's from Shax of all people, right? So I just kind of loved that dynamic.
I think, if I'm recalling correctly, it was really only T'Lyn was on my side. Almost every other crew member who made a comment thought that Janeway
It was pretty harsh. One of my favorite things about that, and since we're talking about the Lower Decks aspect of this, I was really looking at it with these eyes, because going into that episode, I knew ahead of time we were going to have this debate. This was going to be the topic of our podcast. So I was looking at it with that perspective. And I was thinking to myself, oh man, this is going to happen again. Not only are they making intentional judgments or intentional takes on how they thought what was done was extreme, or that it should have been done a different way, or that it was murder or whatever. They were going to have to make yet another statement because it was happening again on the show. Not only once, but like a ton of times. So the moral dilemma about what do we do in this situation was going to sort of come to a head again. But there is only one thing. There's one moment that stopped that from being the case. There was one turning point that eliminated any moral conundrum, and that was, again, T'Lyn. She made a decision. She made a call that gave zero time for anyone in the crew or in the audience to have any feelings about. She was like, you know what? I'm just going to combine them all. Blah, 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 blah. And she blobbed them all together into one giant and they even made a point of clarifying like a non-sentient blob, right? Like that was the... Of meat.
Did they actually say that about the non-sentient blob?
Yeah, because they did. Tendi said it because T'Lyn asked her, like, you don't have a problem with separating them now? And Tendi says, I forget exactly her quote, but she's like, well, normally, but this is a non-sentient blob of meat, so I'm willing to go outside my comfort zone.
Exactly. And once that was done and they were kind of combined together into this one giant blob, specifically mentioning that they were not sentient and this was not something that had to be considered, then there was no moral conundrum. It was completely removed and it was the right call to make. So we, the audience, didn't get any breathing room to feel the weight of that decision because a crewmate on the ship made this arbitrary decision to just sort of blob them together without knowing a lot of background. And it was almost extra forgivable because she is super rigid Vulcan. It was a very logical decision to be made, and she made it on the fly.
Also, T'Illips and his friends were gonna be like murdering a bunch of other people.
Exactly, which is a really good point in juxtaposition to how likable Tuvix is in contrast, which we'll go into more later. T'Lyn is also very new to Starfleet and the ship in general, and so she just kind of like made a call that, you know, we believe while watching it that was the decision that her character would make, and she would just think it was the right thing and then just do it. So once it was done, undoing it was, you know, a clear moral choice.
Can I ask you then, is T'Lyn like a mass murderer then?
Well, I mean...
Because she just took a bunch of sentient beings and merged them into a blob of meat.
Well, right, and I'd really like to like fact check that quote about how that came across, because when I was watching it, it made it seem like, well, it was hard to distinguish and nothing was maybe showing up on the tricorder readily, but it seemed like there was something to be said about, well, Tuvix was charming and people got to know him and got to like him, but, you know, we're supposed to be open-minded, so technically all of these consciousnesses together, they could have had something, there could have been something there that was a new being of sorts, and the fact that we were able to just reject it out of hand because it appeared to us to be this like blob, and it was no longer personable, it was no longer something that we could relate to, I think really kind of brings to question some of these things. And at the end of the day, the decision that was made, even in Lower Decks, was to separate them.
I've got to say, I agree with Jennifer. Janeway was right.
Hey, whoa. No, but Jennifer, I love that you brought that up. I really do, because I think that the show making a statement that it was sort of like this big pointless blob of meat at this point was intended for us to be alleviated of that moral dilemma. I really do. I think that was like an intended, we were supposed to think and know and not doubt that this was no way to live, and it was a mercy no matter what we did at that point. I think that's what they were trying to convey. But I love that you brought this up, because there's no fighting the fact that Tom Wright's portrayal of Tuvix and the writing for that character in the show being, as I said in the introduction, sort of more than the sum of his parts, fitting into the crew so well, being so likable, basically taking the strength so successfully of both of these completely disparate characters and combining them into something that found an immediate home in Voyager and in the hearts of the audience watching, played a very pivotal role in how we all experienced this character, right? Like and I think that sort of goes hand in hand with the total opposite in this case, that when we were supposed to think, oh yeah, it's okay to just do whatever, it's because it was hideous and making gurgling noises, and we were told specifically, this isn't like something you should care about, effectively for the plot device. We were informed that we didn't need to care, that decision had been long gone. Now we were just in the standard Star Trek practice of like, this terrible thing has happened, can we fix it and rescue these people? And once we were back in there, we did. We found a solution. Their personalities were identifiable and separatable, and then we did that, and it was perfectly fine. In Tuvix, though, if he was super awkward and had 3 arms and like Talaxian fur going out of his eyeballs or something, like if there was some sort of inhuman or unpleasant combination of these two people, it would have been a very different discussion. Not just on a personality basis because we like him, but also factoring in like quality of life and things like that. That would have made this decision different and easier to make.
Yeah, well, and I think the other thing that Lower Decks has going for the easier decision, well, at least for Talin's decision, was T'Illips was clearly evil. Like trying to take over the ship and fuse people against their will.
Well, and traumatized, right? Had real reason to believe that, again, in fact, what we actually gain from that as well is the perspective that they were not only afraid of, not only like aware of, but afraid of the previous history that had come with this kind of transporter accident. That they were, once again, a new person who felt self-preservation and was very much afraid of the inevitable outcome. In fact, it was actually kind of funny. I liked that the episode delved into that. They were like, whoa, guys, we're not lost in the Delta Quadrant. We're here. Like it's been years. We could probably find a solution to this. Please stop trying to destroy everything. And they didn't anyway. So there was an extremism there. But I do blame Tana for that. Because her side of the personality, it definitely would have brought that, don't you think, to that reaction? I think that's like in character for her.
Yeah, no, I agree.
So that's actually a really good point, Jennifer. I like that because, we are human. We're not robots and we're not completely logical like Vulcans. We make decisions. And this is something I think is really important in society today to remember. We have our own mind that says this is right and this is wrong, but it's really easy to be impacted by how much we like or don't like or how we experience another person, like the representative of the dilemma, right? So like the fact that it was a moral conundrum is one element of it, but how we felt about Tuvix, how we liked Tuvix, and this isn't just us, the audience, it's also the ship, right? It was a real dilemma for all of them because every single person found some new way to like and appreciate Tuvix, whether it was through his cooking or his interpersonal skills or the friendships that he had, or even the relationship that he had with Kes, right? That sort of like grew over the course of the episode. So it's not that doesn't play a factor, right? Like how much we liked him. And again, shout out to Tom Wright, who just crushed that character. It made an impact.
Oh yeah, excellent job.
So clearly this is a real moral dilemma. I want to start off by saying that these kinds of things are really good. This is one of my favorite things about Star Trek. It's one of my favorite things about that era of Star Trek. And for those of you who have talked Trek with me before, you've probably heard me say it. I actually really loved that dynamic that was Star Trek, that it would pose a question. It would raise this moral conundrum and allow you to see it from a bunch of different angles, to have feelings about it, strong strong feelings about it, but not necessarily tell you which one is correct, not necessarily force you to feel one particular way about it. Instead, they explore an issue, allow everyone to have their feelings about it, allow all the different characters to portray different elements or perspectives that could be had on the topic, and then sort of end the episode at a moment where there's just simply no way that if you were watching this with anyone else, that you couldn't right in that moment have like an hour-long discussion about the topic. That is one of my favorite things about Star Trek in general, and I think was just handled really well back in the TNG, DS9, Voyager, Enterprise era. I think there's just so many episodes that I can think of where that's the case. And one of my favorite scenes in this episode is the very end, because they're not happy. That was not the resolution that everyone wanted. In fact, I think that it was said that somebody on the set, one of the producers or somebody was complimenting the very last scene in the episode where Janeway just sort of walks into the camera with the weight of the whole episode on her face. You could just see it even when Neelix and Tuvok are separated successfully, and Neelix sees Cass and is like, "Hello, sweeting." Like, they have this thing, but he is sad, and so is Tuvok. They're very stoic. I don't know what their memories are in that moment, if they remember it all the way, but you're sort of left thinking that they must, because they weren't asking, "How did I get here? How did this happen?" Or they weren't elated, right? They weren't like super excited. They were very dismal. And so was Janeway. And the last scene, she walks out and she just walks into the camera looking so burdened by everything that had happened. So again, like when you finish that episode, if you're watching that with your friend or your spouse or your family or whatever, there's no way that you guys don't talk and have some great conversation about how everyone feels about that. Or you go online in typical Star Trek nerd fashion and like write a giant blog post. Like, it's just such a great element of Star Trek.
Yeah, I hadn't remembered the Tuvok Neelix sort of reaction after they were separated, but you are right. It's not like they skipped the time as Tuvix, or at least it doesn't seem to be.
Yeah, and it infers that they felt the weight of that they remembered it.
I actually never took that into consideration, that they had memories of that time. So do they both have all of the memories, or are they split between the two of them, or non-existent?
It's a really good question, and I don't think that I have the authority to speak on it as fact, but I would say that if that were the case, the last thing that they was, Neelix and Tuvok were down on the planet collecting plants. They had that orchid that had caused this sort of problem in the first place, and then they were beamed up. Tuvix had all of the memories of each individual person, right? Going through that whole episode. You would think that the very first thing out of their mouths in sickbay would be, "Where am I? What happened? How did I get here? Why is Cass crying?" None of that happened. So you can almost infer some of the feelings that they had about this independently of the feelings that Tuvix had, that at least they probably felt that sadness, that betrayal, because that's certainly what that must have felt like. And listen, they really go into how Tuvix feels about it. I hadn't thought about this the last time that I watched this episode, but there are like Shakespearean allusions here, man. There is some big Merchant of Venice Shylock vibes in this thing. Like he's sort of fighting for his right as an individual to survive, and he's trying to say, "I'm like you." This is the same speech that you get in The Merchant of Venice, and they even quote that in the Undiscovered Country in the 6th original series movie. You hear him say, like, "Tickle us, do we not laugh? Prick us, do we not bleed? Wrong us, shall we not revenge?" That's that whole speech from Shylock. And he says something very similar in the episode himself. He says, like, "When I am happy, I laugh. When I'm sad, I cry. When I stub my toe, I yell out in pain. I am flesh and blood, and I have the right to live." It's so dramatic. It's so, this is part of what I think makes it so visceral, is that this character truly feels this. Like, whether it was a moral choice or not, they make us feel the weight of killing a person, even if you don't believe that it's killing. We, the audience, are meant to feel it because he himself feels it throughout the episode.
I want to clarify for listeners. I mean, he got killed, right? He ceased to exist. I don't disagree with that, and I do agree that's sad. I just still think it was actually the moral decision.
Well, right. And I mean, there's a lot of thoughts here. And the first one is just on a logical standpoint. 2 Starfleet officers were maimed, altered in a way from a an accidental thing, right? And
Well, I don't want to be dismissive, but it was only one Starfleet officer.
okay, yes, true.
Poor Neelix.
Poor
Oh,
Neelix.
but can I shout out just a really quick thing? That's actually the first episode that you ever see Neelix in a Starfleet uniform in.
Oh, that's true. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead,
But,
Jennifer.
I couldn't resist.
Just on a logical point, like you're missing 2 crew members and you have this new being. And even like, I can't imagine as maybe a Vulcan crew member what they would say. Like if there was one there reacting to this like there was in Lower Decks, the logic is to save the 2 people over the 1 person for various reasons, even just the fact that having those 2 crew members to help get this ship back. And the fact that he also, both of them have, well, not both, but one of them having family members at home, children, a wife. There is a weight there. You're taking somebody away. This person has lived a whole life. They have so many different connections, and to not give them their life back when there is a possibility to do so, then it feels like you're just allowing that person to be killed as well. And then the other thing that I've always been curious about, because they don't really talk about it, is if you really want to go into it, are we to assume that there's a new soul in Tuvix, and that then where did the other 2 go? Or is somehow Tuvix an odd combination of both of their souls into one body to form this new consciousness?
So that's a very existential question that I do not have real answers to. But I would argue that for the sake of the episode, the writers are intending Tuvix to be the latter, as if he is the combination of the 2. At least that's how he would purport it to be. He said, I have the memories of both men, but I have a single consciousness. I am me. And I want to live. That's the perspective.
Well, then if it's then 2, then by separating them, if you in that way, you're not really killing them off. You're just separating this new consciousness back into 2 parts. But the energy
I love it.
and what goes...
You're recruited for my side of the debate.
Yeah, she's on your side of the debate. We've had this debate before.
But what goes into consciousness, if we want to say that consciousness is somehow a soul, what happened was they somehow combined these 2 together to create a new one, but the energy is still the same, whether it's combined or separate. That energy still exists, so nothing really has been destroyed in that sense.
So I love where you're going, and this is the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the 2, Vix, argument, which makes perfect sense. You're like, there's 2 people that this terrible thing had happened to, nobody planned for that to happen, and now this new thing is together. Maybe if all things are equal, if this really is just the same, being combined, then it's not doing any damage to separate them. Now, that I'm willing to entertain the possibility of that, which is why if Tuvix had said, yes, I am willing to go through this procedure, then I'm on board with that. Then I would maybe, what your point would do in that situation for me is reduce the guilt or the burden of the death of Tuvix into the restoration of Neelix and Tuvok, except that he as his own individual person who, as we agreed, is no more, right? However you want to feel about that individual person is gone. And he begged not to be killed. We are dealing with several different arguments to this. Some of it is moral, some of it is even as far as spiritual, and some of it is based on personal preference and relationship with the character. And then lastly, and this is where it's the sticking point for me, was it the right decision for a Starfleet captain to do, knowing what we know about Starfleet and the way that Janeway goes out of her way to uphold those Starfleet values? And to that, my answer is still no. In fact, I would give you a counterpoint to what you just said, because I know that both of you, especially Commander Jennifer, reveres the Doctor. And what is never brought up in this discussion is that the Doctor refuses to do it. At the end of the episode, they go to him and they go, okay, Doctor, inject the isotope. Let's separate them. And he says, a physician must do no harm. I will not take Mr. Tuvix's life against his will. And he steps back, and Janeway, in a way that I almost expected her to be wearing black gloves, if you remember the episode.
Wow.
Yeah, right? Took the hypo spray and did it herself with the Doctor standing on the sidelines. This to me is like, that is a moral badge, or at least a badge of a lack of morals, like with the wrong decision to me that the Doctor had made his stance on this debate pretty clear.
I have a question. What season was this again? Season 2, right?
Season 2,
Yeah, close to the end of season
22,
two.
24, yeah, something like
I
that.
would be curious to wonder if the doctor's decision would have been the same in season 6.
Oh, like late, yeah.
Or season 7, because this was very early on in the doctor's evolution. And I think
Yeah, that's true.
as
He was mostly driven by his original
original
at this point.
programming, of course, a medical hologram would have to be programmed that if a patient says, do not do this to me, that they would not do it. There's a lot of implications there. The nuance of a well-rounded human decision, I don't think he was there yet. And I think his decision might have been a little less one-sided if he had been in season 6 or 7 at that time.
So I don't know if I agree with that, but that is an excellent point that I would not have considered on my own. It is very early in the show. The Doctor, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that the Doctor as a character, as an individual, grows dramatically throughout the show. Specifically between seasons 2 and 6. 7 of 9 wasn't there yet. He hadn't had his family. You know, there were so many things that sort of evolved him as a person. Would that allow him to go against what he felt is a violation of the Hippocratic Oath? I don't know. But
Or would this have just thrown him into another one of those things where he has the breakdown and they have to block his memory files?
yeah, maybe they did, and they just didn't make an episode about it. I mean, that's true. That's a really good point as well, because we do know that the Doctor gets into those sort of ethical conundrums and, you know, like the ancient computers of old, can be thrown into some sort of... I talk about this all the time because it was such a trope in like the 20th century media. Like if you were in the 60s or 70s, when technology was just emerging, it was like technology came with it an inherent threat, and that threat was almost always defeated by some simple paradox. Like, cannot compute, I'm going to explode. Like, that was such a thing. In fact, that was oh gosh, the original series fans are gonna kill me. Don't tell me, Jennifer. It's Landru. Landru was broken with some sort of simple paradox, right?
Yes, that's correct. It was Landru.
It was Landru. Jeez, Landru. So, listen, I'm willing to entertain that. It's possible. Maybe the Doctor's perspective would have changed over time. But I'm going to bring to you guys another example that I'm very curious what you think about, because this is the evolution of the perspective of a flesh and blood character, which is Janeway herself. I call Janeway to the stand. That was a little weird, I admit.
I was really hoping we had like a soundboard of her like entering the
Maybe
room.
I'll add one in post. We'll see.
We're Starfleet officers. Weird is part of the job.
So Jane, like one of the things that occurs to me every time I go through this sort of thought process in terms of Tuvix, watching Voyager again, there are a couple of episodes that sort of come to mind, and I'm curious to what you guys think about this. One is the episode, I want to say later seasons, like season 6, Riddles, which is the episode where Tuvok is accosted by a stealth, xenophobic, paranoid species at the Beneth or something like that.
Oh,
and
yeah.
they rob him of basically his regular consciousness, and he ends up sort of akin to a child. He feels
Yeah, when is a
emotions.
Vulcan not a Vulcan?
Exactly, when he loses his logic, right? But so that episode has Tuvok effectively rebooted and in sort of like a totally different persona. Very much akin to Tuvix. This is a different version of Tuvok, who at the end of the episode, remember, he makes friends, everybody likes him. He can't be the tactical officer anymore. That's pretty clear. But he definitely makes friends. People like him. He gets a great relationship with Neelix. He discovers cooking and makes excellent desserts, and everybody sort of enjoys seeing Tuvok so happy. He's very clearly happy. In fact, happier is probably a safe thing to say, even though that's sort of not really relatable to a Vulcan. But at the end of the episode, they discover the solution, and he was instrumental in discovering that solution, right? He remembered the cloaking frequency, and he drew it with like cake topping or something, right?
Oh, frosting. Yeah.
Frosting, yeah. And he's like, this is what I saw. And they go, oh my God, that's the cloaking frequency. And they end up solving the riddle. And he last minute decides he doesn't want to do it. He doesn't want to go through the procedure. He's like, I'm going to miss my friends. I'm not going to be happy. I have to play Calto. Like, he didn't want to do that. He's like, I like cooking. And in the last minute, Neelix talks him into it. But my question to you guys is, what if he didn't? What if Tuvok said no and that was pushed? Would you guys have supported forcing him to go through that as well?
I would have, because it would have been the same principle that this person was altered against their will, and now they're not being allowed to have that original person's interests taken into account anymore.
So that is only a valid point if you no longer recognize the current version of Tuvix as an individual with those rights as well, because at that point, his own desires are being ignored, are being trampled, right? Like you say, I know better than you, and I assume that you should make this choice.
No, but it's an alteration of the original person. And when somebody is born and somebody starts to live their lives, if they are somehow changed against their will, somebody has to stand up for the fact that that person has to be like, you need to change that back. It is the same person. They're just thinking in a capacity that they would not have thought of if they were their original selves.
So to connect that to our modern society, what you're talking about is like stewardship or conservatorship of somebody who can no longer make reasonable decisions for themselves. So you end up getting a court-appointed person who can make those decisions for them. But that's like the rub, as they say, comes in like how much, it's not about how much they've been changed, it's about whether or not they're capable of making informed decisions about this. Now, I can't tell you what the Starfleet Code would have ruled on that, but I could tell you that in modern society, there would be a really good argument for the fact that he is of sound mind and is making a decision that is not against his best interest, but a preference. Would you disagree?
I don't know. I think I disagree with that. I mean, I'm not a lawyer or a medical professional.
Surprise!
But, he basically...
I am. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh no, I've activated Merrick's trap card. No, but like he basically had like a brain injury. I mean, that was what he had. But and it led to like changed cognitive abilities and different attitudes. And I agree with you. I don't think that you could say he wasn't of sound mind, but I think Jennifer's point is really good. Someone has to stand up for what original Tuvok would have wanted. And like, I don't know, like if I went out tomorrow and had a severe concussion and lost my memory, someone would hopefully stand up and say, yeah, treat him if you can, even if he's real happy wandering around the streets, catching butterflies.
Which is probably what New Tuvok would have done in the episode
exactly.
Riddles. I'm with you there. It would be almost impossible if we were to bring it into that same imaginary court in our same real life existence here to make that same claim about Tuvix, though, because he really was, in every measurable sense, an advancement in the original two.
I mean, I agree, but I do think that we've talked about this before, but not everyone's heard it. The Tuvix original problem comes down to the philosophical trolley problem. Like, are you going to take action that harms one person to save, quote unquote, two? Or are you going to not take action, lose two, but keep the one?
Oh, I love that you brought that up because that is an excellent thing to debate. I find that one of those great thought puzzles that people come up with. It always, it invariably leads to some really great discussion with people, and I really enjoy that. But I would say that the big crux of the difference here is that decision can only be independently made or discussed with objectivity before the train has run over either of them. In this instance, it has run over them already, so we actually have to take an active role in doing harm to gain good. And now that is where I draw that line between what I would like to do personally and what I think Starfleet would do. Because I truly believe that in all of the episodes of Star Trek leading up until this point, it has set a precedent to where she should not have done that. That is an unacceptable line to cross for a Starfleet captain. That even though we all agree, if we can do that without harm, then yes. But if you recognize Tuvix as an individual, there's no precedent ever in Starfleet that says it's okay to do harm to one person who does not wish it in order to get the benefit of any amount of people outside of that. That's one of those sort of tenets of Starfleet in general.
Yes, but that's assuming that Tuvix really is a new being. And I still would argue that Tuvix is just a combination.
But he would argue against it.
Yes.
That means you're taking the person, your patient in front of you who is saying, I am independent. Again, to bring it to a court perspective, he would just have to clearly show that he was different from the other two people. That would be the crux of it, right? If you could imagine a Measure of a Man episode being done specifically about this, you gotta know that what the crux of the case would be on him proving that he is distinct. And again, they brought this term up in the episode themselves, more than the sum of his parts, which I think is the linchpin of this whole thing, because they said it, Chakotay said it, and I think that they wanted that in our consciousness because he is. I mean, he is not just this direct melding, and yet he has somehow become something new and awesome.
I think that takes in too much of the emotional side of things, because because everybody likes him so much. Sadly, everybody likes him more. And that's really not fair to make a decision based on that.
I do think it's weird though, right? Because from like a court perspective, well, again, not actually a lawyer, don't know anything about the law.
Apologizing to all the lawyers who are listening to our podcast.
Really sorry for everyone who's going to tell me how wrong I am. But he was essentially created using genetic material from Tuvok and Neelix without their consent. Like, I think that anyone, like family members, like Kes, could have shown up and said, no, that shouldn't happen. I want this one back, and would have at least a reasonable argument to make about this being was created by like taking a loved one against their will, and if we have the means, I should be able to get that loved one back.
Oh, I completely agree. Although I believe that is still heavily rooted in the sort of like emotional perspective that
for sure it is.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
So in like if T'Pel showed up and was like, this is highly illogical, give me back my husband. Like, that would make perfect sense. But and you're right, the act that caused it to happen in the first place, if put on trial, is indefensible. This is something that Starfleet would not do or not allow, and it certainly wasn't. This was like a mistake, an error, a glitch in the transporter. But once that had happened, doing harm for the greater good is, I still think, a precedent that has been firmly set by Starfleet. And I'm going to bring up the next example. So that was riddles that we went over, which is really interesting. I appreciate you guys' thoughts on that. The next one that I'd like to bring up is the Vidians. Now,
I was going to bring up the Vidians.
Oh,
too,
excellent.
I
Okay,
was
so the
also
Vidians.
actually about to bring in something
You're
related
kidding.
to that.
Listen, the Vidians stole. In fact, it wasn't even the guy who stole it. It was his steward, the guy who looks out for him. They have a name for it. I forgot what it is. But the Vidian stole lungs from Neelix to make it so this other Vidian lived. He was going to die, and he enacted wrong and harm to allow this new dynamic so that the Vidian that he was caring for would be able to live. And then in wonderful Star Trek, they caught them, and then they were forced to make a moral decision. And Janeway specifically said it would be an immoral choice. Even though it was wrong to do, and even though it might kill Neelix, he would not allow him to take his lungs back because it would do harm. And we don't do that. This was fully explored in an episode with the Vidians. So it was just a very fascinating take on that. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I was worried you were going to bring this one.
I would actually argue that that person was an actual person to begin with. These were...
Wow, take that, Tuvix.
It's almost like it's saying,
Jeez,
like,
Jennifer.
no, but this person was already there. They already had a whole life. They weren't just created in that moment.
But does it matter? When he's happy, he laughs. When he's sad, he cries. When he stubs his toe, he yells out in pain.
I don't know. I mean, obviously Jennifer and I are basically on the same side of this argument. I think my version is a little more extreme, but I think I agree with the precedent there. Like, although I do agree with Merrick as well that it sets kind of a dangerous precedent, but I do think it matters that this Vidian was like a pre-existing being versus Tuvix being created yesterday by a transporter accident.
Oh, and I actually totally disagree, because if he was a brand new being that had just been born the next day, is it the matter in which it happened? It doesn't really matter. How, like, at what point then does the length of life?
No, I know,
decision?
and it's a flimsy position. But I'm just saying it's how I feel.
No, and feelings are important here. Okay, we understand.
But no. Like, I don't know how to defend it.
Okay, so with Tuvok and Neelix, though, it was the genetic material just squished together. So what I was going to bring up was a little bit of a different thought concept. So we see this, like, lovely melded person, right? This melded DNA, this melded consciousness of combining two individuals in every possible way. But what if it was like that the transporter combined half and half? Like, let's say it looked like Tuvok on one side and Neelix on the other side, and it was almost like a little Frankenstein-esque, and that their consciousnesses were like melded together, because that's basically what happened. And it didn't look as much like this third human, but it really did look like, well, they were just stuffed together, and now their consciousness is this new consciousness because it's been all like integrated into each other, so there's different thought processes here. I think that would have made a difference in how everyone thought about it. I think it would have driven home that this really was just a melded consciousness.
There is a point to be made there for sure, and I I think there are two perspectives on it, which is how other people perceive and see Tuvix. But I think that the crux of my argument is how Tuvix perceives himself. And this is, again, that was the moment. That's the one and only line that the doctor cared about. My patient said no. My patient says, I'm an individual. I want to live. I don't want this procedure. We have to remember, this was done with security dragging him to sickbay. He was forced, and Janeway had to do it independently because the doc wouldn't cross that line. I think that's the important side.
But I want to bring it back to the Vidian episode for 1 second. Neelix in that episode specifically asks for the doctor to basically stop treating him and to release the field and let him go because he can't lay there paralyzed.
Yes.
And the doctor won't do that either.
Yes.
Even though the patient is trying to refuse the ongoing treatment.
That is true. That is true.
But I think the difference between the Vidians, I know I'm getting away from Jennifer's point just there, but the difference with the Vidian situation is Neelix is alive and somewhat functioning. I mean, he can't move. He's stuck in a stasis field, but like he's not in immediate risk of death until we think about how often the holographic emitters fail in sick
Go
bay
out in sick bay.
But he's not in immediate danger, and I think that's what makes the Vidian decision from Janeway, like, I'm not going to kill you to restore my crew person, very slightly different, right? Neelix is there. He hasn't been killed. It's not like if it was kill this Vidian and revive Neelix or bring Neelix back from the dead, that would be a little closer to the Tuvix situation.
Maybe so. I do know that in that episode, they had just basically had a speech from the doctor going, this probably isn't going to go well. I'm probably not going to be able to make this solution. And right. I would say that when we talked earlier about sort of...
Oh, and Neelix was for sure not going to live that way.
Right, and he wasn't. And also, he... You know, we were talking earlier about a place in which somebody has someone else make a decision for them when we consider them not in their right mind. And that example that you just gave is something that is very translatable to our real life that happens all the time. Somebody ends up in some sort of, trauma, some sort of sickness, injury, depression resulting from some sort of diminished capacity, something like that happening. And the courts are very ready to acknowledge the truth that somebody is not in their right mind in that situation to make a decision akin to suicide, which is what effectively that was at that time.
Oh yeah, that's what Neelix was asking for.
Right. And again, in Star Trek, we don't even know, I mean, we know that Starfleet does not like the death penalty, and we know that they don't like suicide either. They've made comments about that in various episodes throughout the years.
Yeah, like the other Q episode.
Oh my God, that's a great, yes, and also in Voyager, which is excellent. So we're staying consistent with that. These are really good sides to this. I would hesitate. Listen, guys, I don't know how many times this has been debated, but I'm going to guess that we branched out into some pretty interesting and philosophical stuff that is not super often covered here, which is pretty awesome. I think the end result is there's a reason why this has been debated for so long. It is just a really, really difficult choice to make.
Well, and I don't think you need to come to an actual answer.
And I actually would like to just bring up one more idea, that even though we can debate whether it was necessarily the Starfleet choice, but based on Janeway's code and, I guess, mission from episode 1, this was to get her crew home. And in order
bringing
to do
Tuvix
that,
home doesn't get any extra credit.
it was the only... I really truly believe that it was the only choice Janeway could have made based on her mission, her personal mission.
Whoa, that's an interesting take. Okay, so you're saying that if she were to be making decisions entirely based on the result and its efficacy in specifically returning her crew home, that it was the right decision to make because the individuals of Tuvok and Neelix were more important or more essential to that goal than Tuvix would have been?
Yes, even just one-on-one.
And that was a worthwhile platform in which to make a life or death decision?
Even on one. She promised her crew and herself that she would get them home to their friends, families, and loved ones. And this is getting Tuvok's home to his wife and his children.
And yet I have a broader point to make, which is that they were only in this situation in the first place because of Janeway's refusal to cause problems to others for the greater good of her crew getting home. This already against a precedent, I think.
Which is something that she holds the guilt of for the entire show, which further explains why she would make this choice.
Maybe not by season 2.
Oh, that could be true. We see her real depressed in the opener of
5,
season 5,
yeah.
the night where they're in the void.
I love that episode.
But I think Jennifer's point is a good one, though. Like, that is Janeway's main driving thing, so much so that fake copy Janeway on the
Ooh.
on the
Yeah.
Demon Planet ship refuses to turn around from heading to Earth even after they realize that they're not the real crew.
Even after they're melting on the floor. Wow, I had not thought of that. That is true. So now we are now going into a perfectly reasonable realm of why Janeway made the decision that she made and if it is in character for her to make. And that is a much more reasonable place for us all to be in, because that's very subjective and allows for her to make the wrong choice, or the wrong choice for some. And that, I think,
Wait, I was going to say, yeah, you mean the right choice.
I would like to argue that she
the right
made
choice
the right
for
choice.
some.
She made the right choice for many, many people.
maybe so, but she made the wrong choice for Starfleet.
She only made maybe the wrong choice for one combination.
Starfleet. Say it.
No, she made the wrong choice for the blob that was Tuvix.
For the blood.
For the sentient meat blob.
That is so aggressive, Commander Jennifer.
All right, signing off. I'll see you later, fellow meat blobs.
Fellow non-sentient blobs.
Well, no, we're sentient.
Oh, okay.
Fellow sentient meat blobs.
All right, well, fine. Prove to me that you're sentient.
God, I hate that. I mean, it's so good though, because you don't know that I'm sentient.
No, I don't. And it's literally in The Measure of a Man. I mean, that is a really good element.
Oh, I know. I mean, it's such a good quote.
I honestly think that your entire premise, which is perfectly valid, is really based on the refusal to acknowledge. I think this is the crux for a lot of people, so I just want to acknowledge it. I think it's the refusal to acknowledge Tuvix as an independent individual. Like, if you don't do that, if it's just the malfunctioning amalgamation of two separate and disparate personas that are just glitching and not wanting to be separated, even though there's nothing that they're going to lose, then it allows for that morality to continually feel purely altruistic. I think it's more complicated than that. I think he is his own person. I think that's probably the actual point in which we disagree.
Let me pose an alternative formulation of the Tuvix accident and see what your response is, Merrick. And feel free to also tell me why this is not a good alternative formulation. I'm open to that, because I literally just thought of it while we were talking. Let's say that there was some sort of accident. I can't even come up with the sci-fi explanation for what would cause this to happen, where Neelix and Tuvok were down on the planet doing their survey, picking flowers, whatnot. They end up back on Voyager, whether it's through the transporter or some other transportation thing, and a new life's been created, but that life has to constantly siphon off, like, either their blood or their... Oh, kind of like the B'Elanna episode where the thing attaches to her.
Wait, or the crystalline entity. I think about the crystalline entity every single time this comes up, because that creature has a right to live, but it only lives by literally decimating entire planets.
Right, but so, like, let's say Neelix and Tuvok are both in sickbay. They're on life support. It's the only way we can keep them alive. We have to constantly infuse them with Vulcan and Talaxian blood, or I don't know, something. Neural energy. Make something up. And this new entity that we've graciously named Tuvix, it didn't name itself for some reason in my alternate scenario. It only lives by constantly siphoning the energy or blood or whatever from these two other living beings. Do we let that go just forever?
That is a really good question. And that one, I would admit, is a really tough moral choice to make.
I think it's still a hard decision, but I still think kill Tuvix.
Well, but I would say the difference is the ongoing nature of what you're saying. So, like, say that the crystalline entity, which they were forced to kill, right? Like the thing that used B'Elanna as a host, like that was just a defense mechanism. It didn't need that. But think about the crystalline entity that requires literally the decimation of every life form on entire planets. And then you make this decision, like, we're Starfleet, we don't destroy new life. And even in the case of the crystalline entity, there was some real moral ambiguity there. They felt really torn about that. But
well, wait, they weren't forced to destroy it. Didn't the scientists like destroy it against Captain Picard's orders?
Well, that's true. That's true. That was the mother of the boy that had.
Yeah, but I mean, like, I'm just saying. I think if anything, that reinforces your point. Even then, Picard wasn't willing to order the destruction of it.
That's very true, and I appreciate you throwing me that bone, because I hadn't thought about that point. But even if you were to make up a situation where it's not even just feeding on something small, but like in the crystalline entity case of just literally destroying planets or the Borg or whatever, and you're like, we should kill these because it's doing so much.
It's been a while since you snuck in a Borg sympathizer.
I know.
All right, sorry.
I did throw in a Borg joke in my introduction. If the crystalline entity were to be destroying planets left and right, and you had to make this choice. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. That's really what this all boils down to. That would be one thing, but what if in a hypothetical scenario, the crystalline entity had needed to kill that many people and destroy that much life to become a form, but then now that it's that form, it will never kill again. Would you then kill it, even if it was to get all those things back? That's the more appropriate comparison, and that still brings all of the same levels of difficulty to the layers of this conversation. It's so hard. You have to be okay with doing harm for the greater good, and Starfleet usually makes a pretty firm stance on that.
Oh, well, thank God we weren't in contact with Starfleet Command.
Yeah, this could have gone so much worse.
I don't know. I mean, part of what makes the Tuvix episode so interesting is it's a situation that hasn't come up a lot in Star Trek in that exact formulation. Obviously, similar things have happened in various episodes, but that combined with the fact that Voyager is however many thousand light years away from home at that point, I'm going to guess 60,000 because we're in season 2.
Season 2, yeah.
Maybe 55,000. It makes it like a really interesting discussion, and I'm not 100% sure that we know. Well, no, I am 100% sure that we don't know what Starfleet's actual ruling is, but that's what makes these discussions fun.
Yeah, it leaves room for these kinds of conflicting feelings. The
And for Merrick to be wrong.
How dare you, sir? That's a demotion. You're now executive officer in charge of Radish's Azure. But yeah, the infinite nuances in the discussion that allows for this same conversation to be had so many times with so many people feeling very strongly about it so that it's worth having that discussion over and over again. This is what makes Star Trek great. One of the examples I brought up to you, actually both of you in individual conversations a couple of weeks ago, was the Worf gets paralyzed by a barrel episode.
Yeah.
Which is an excellent episode that is not fun at all to watch. Like I would say that that's in no one's top anything, but it really serves to do exactly this. There are so many morals to explore, so many cultural values that we either respect or don't respect. The episode takes the time to make every single character on the show represent a different perspective that are all valid, and none of them are being portrayed in a way that is overtly wrong. So, and even by the end, you're left to make your own decisions and to debate about it. And I just think that is sci-fi at its best, to allow us to do exactly this.
Can I share my weird take on the Worf Barrel episode?
Of course.
I think Janeway did the right thing there too.
Actually, I wasn't ready. I was just taking a sip of water. That's not fair. Okay, so this has been phenomenal. I love you guys. These are the kinds of talks that I just adore. These are my favorite podcasts to have. So thank you guys so much for being a part of this. I'm going to end this with a really awesome bit of trivia that my guess is that you've not heard before. And I think that it just shines such a cool light on this whole episode. This episode was originally written by a different freelance writer or writers. And when it was written originally, it was a dramatically comical tone full of slapstick elements. It was going to be a comedic episode.
Wait, really?
Staff writer Kenneth Biller said that it was almost like a farcical 1960s sitcom, and he literally even wrote a joking theme song, like a full funny theme song to go with this hilarious dynamic of the episode. However, he later decided that the premise, though somewhat hokey, deserved a much more serious and philosophical approach. So he thoroughly rewrote it to focus on a much more dramatic angle to experience exactly this level of nuance. It isn't that interesting to you? Like, this was almost such a different episode,
so
and
hard to
26
imagine.
years later, it's on Lower Decks, and we're still debating it because they decided to take a slightly different take on a freelance writer's story. I just think that's the coolest thing.
I know you're trying to sign off, but I gotta say, remember how like during the COVID lockdowns, a bunch of places did like table readings of like episodes?
Yes.
I would have loved to hear a table reading of the original like farcical script
Oh
of
my
the
God,
Tuvix episode.
can we still have it? I just want the script. And not only the script, man, I want the song. I want the theme song that Biller wrote.
Yeah,
That would just been
you
so
were right.
awesome.
I had never heard that fact, and it's very cool.
Isn't that fantastic? It just goes to show, there's magic in these episodes being made all the time. And sometimes it's so close to being something great and isn't, or sometimes it was so close to being not great and then was. And I just love those stories, man. That's, at the end of the day, that's what I think makes Star Trek a cooler, more interesting, more engaging fandom than any other fandom, because we have the breadth of these stories spanning 57 years and the nerdy, awesome people who have made all of the information available from the very beginning. We just have a voracious fandom, and it has kept such good records of so many crazy things. You know, check the trivia of all sorts of other shows and things. It's not the same.
Yeah.
Star Trek fans are crazy, and we love you all. All right, so we're going to wrap up here. Guys, thank you so much for being a part of this. Everyone who's listening, thank you for being with us until the end. If you have any thoughts about Tuvix or anything we said in here, please do us a favor, drop us a comment down below. It makes great discussion and really good engagement for the channel. I promise whatever you type, there will be replies to it, so we will be interacting with you. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and check other sites for the podcast soon. We're going to be uploading to a lot of things just around the corner here. So hopefully we'll see you guys very, very soon. Thanks. Greetings and felicitations, as Trelane would say. We hope you've enjoyed the discussion. If you've made it this far, we're very grateful to you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share the video. It helps us a great deal. If you'd like to support The Night Shift, we have a Ko-Fi. And to join the discussions, interact with the crew, participate in watch parties, and stay up to date on all of our content, we hope you'll join our Discord. Both links can be found in the description below. We hope you have a wonderful day, and of course, live long and prosper.